Hello! Today I'll be cleaning out the centrifugal oil filter and replacing the clutch discs and plates on my wife's 2018 Grom, actually sold in Europe as the Honda MSX 125. This one was bought new about 4 years ago and is coming up on its 20,000 kilometer mark, which is around 12,000 miles. I'll be using all original Honda parts, and I will be replacing the clutch springs, all 6 of them, the central clutch bearing, the one in the center of the pressure plate, the oil filter gasket, the clutch plates, there's 4 of them, and the clutch friction discs, 5 in total. I was lucky enough that my brother lives in Thailand right now, so I was able to get these right from the source at a great price. I did the math and prices in Romania for this would have been about 3 times higher. Very likely I'll need the engine gasket for this, and also this Honda special tool. A bit pricey, but required for both the center nut of the oil spinner and the center nut of the clutch assembly. I don't think there's any way to avoid using this one. Several other YouTube videos out there pointing out that things are a lot easier and you get better access to the engine cover if you remove this rear triangle-shaped footstand supporting part. The brake pedal and master cylinder are also attached to it. It is held in place in 3 points. There's a 12mm towards the back, which I'm removing right now. Then a 19mm nut that's pretty tight and required some persuading until it finally gave in. And a 12mm bolt at the bottom that came out easily. The nut towards the rear is actually a nut and bolt. You need to hold on to the nut on the other side. Then you can sort of wiggle the whole thing out, maybe. In my case I couldn't because the brake hose that goes to the master cylinder was way too tight and I was afraid I would tear it. So I had to remove the master cylinder, which is held in place by 2 8mm bolts that are a bit of a pain to get out because they used Loctite on them. Once the master cylinder is off, it's a lot easier to pull the whole thing away. But mind the end of the brake pedal, which easily gets caught in the stock exhaust cover. Removing this cover would have made things easier and I would have avoided scratching it in the process. You can set the whole thing out of the way on the rear fender. I'm wiping the dirt away all around the engine to avoid getting stuff inside the engine case. It's the second time I'm doing this. I already replaced the clutch on my 2018 Honda CRF 250L, and I have a video of that linked in the description, and I like to keep things fairly clean. Before opening up the engine case, it's a good idea to drain the oil. You can do this by removing the 17mm bolt under the engine. You should expect slightly less than 1 liter of oil to come out, so be prepared with the appropriate container. I'm still using ice cream boxes, even after the oil change incident on my CRF 250. At least this time, it wasn't messy at all. Remember, it's about 1 liter or 1 quart or 0.20 gallons. There are 9 8mm bolts all around the engine case. 3 of them also hold small brackets in place, 1 for the clutch cable and 2 for cable management. Once you find the right tool, things go very smoothly. The right tool for me, in this case, was a small electric impact driver with a long adapter attached to it. Remember to unfasten these bolts in a crisscross pattern so you don't put uneven strain on the metal. I put all the bolts into a piece of cardboard. Even for a fairly simple job like this one, this really helps me. In this case, all 9 engine bolts are identical. Then it was time to remove the engine case cover. I forgot to record the removal of the clutch cable, top left. It's a simple matter of pushing forward on the lever and sliding the cable backwards and to the side. The engine cover may or may not be stuck in your case. I just punched it a couple of times. Worst case scenario, I imagine slightly hitting it sideways with a rubber mallet would help. One thing that also helps is removing the oil dipstick beforehand so it doesn't get snagged behind the oil spinner. With the cover off, 2 big round things become immediately visible. The clutch assembly on the left, and to the right and in front of the clutch, the centrifugal oil filter or spinner. We'll open up the clutch basket in order to replace the clutch discs and plates inside, and we'll remove and clean the oil filter. The green gasket was in pretty good shape, but not reusable, I think. I had bought a new one, so replacing it made sense. Though, to be honest, the worst part of this entire job was the removal of this gasket. My wife helped here, but I didn't document the process. And she said it was a pain. She used a very sharp scalpel and a couple of scalpel blades and managed not to scratch the edge at all, just scuff it a bit here and there, but it was tedious and time consuming. Yours may peel off easily, but mine seemed really baked in there. Now, if you try to unfasten any of these bolts directly, the whole thing starts to spin. You need to put something in between the cogwheels at the back to keep them from turning. A piece of wood seemed like the perfect soft material that wouldn't damage the teeth, but it is not what I would recommend. I wouldn't use a screwdriver either. Get yourself a copper or aluminum piece that's at least 2 or 3 millimeters in thickness. If you're properly preventing the gears from spinning, the whole process should continue smoothly. These are 10mm bolts that are not tight at all, but they did have a locking agent on them, which meant they came out slowly. Then I could remove the metal plate, which exposes the insides of the filter. This looks like a big, heavy, shiny wheel, but it's empty at the core. Like most of us. So I guess this is how a centrifugal filter or spinner works. It spins and heavy particles get stuck to the inside wall. You can now start to clean the buildup inside, but if you're planning on fiddling with the clutch as well, a better way to clean this is to take the whole thing off. There was a fair amount of gunk in there, a lot more than I would have expected, to be honest. Makes one wonder if this has ever been cleaned before during scheduled servicing in the shop. The gunk is quite pretty, it glitters in the light, but I don't think that qualifies as metal shavings, so I chose not to worry. I just took out the sticky stuff stuck to the wall and then wiped the rest with paper towels. Some people mentioned using lint-free stuff, and I would say yes, that would be a good idea. In the lower part of the engine, there's a screen with a rubber seal that wedges in there. I think it's supposed to catch the bigger stuff settling to the bottom. The shower drain of the engine, I would call it. Mine had some goo on it that I got rid of. The thinner part goes in first, and there was also a dot painted on mine, so I knew which part faces up. On the clutch side, this was my inspection of the lifter plate bearing. It felt like it spinned freely and smoothly, but I did end up replacing it anyway. Let me quickly showcase the cardboard nut organizer again. And then move on to the special tool. Special tool for a special nut. The smaller side goes into the oil spinner center, and you will need an extension to properly operate this. It's going to be pretty tight, and the gears will want to spin while you're doing this, so make sure you have something wedged in there that's properly preventing them from turning. That's the black nut right there. You can then simply slide the filter out. Keep track of the thick spacer that goes right behind the special nut. This black plastic gasket also needs to be removed and replaced. Now, while keeping the gears from turning, this time from the bottom of the assembly upwards, I could easily remove the 3 bolts of the pressure plate, but I shouldn't have. Really, don't remove them, remove the center bearing instead. That saves you a lot of trouble later on. You will very soon see what I mean. These 3 bolts keep pressure on the discs below and stop the whole thing from rotating. If you remove them, then you cannot easily remove special nut number 2 that you can see right in the center there. And that bearing should be easy to remove. As you can see me using the pressure plate as a fidget spinner here, notice that the bearing slides out very easily. My CRF 250L did not have this issue because this whole clutch basket looks a bit different and you don't need to remove the center nut to get to the discs and plates. So here's what I was talking about earlier. The whole thing spins and I couldn't find a good way to stop it from doing that. Also, that nut is pretty tight. So I had to reverse the process and put the lifter plate back on. A quick note, there are 6 springs and 6 holes, but only 3 of those holes have threads. It took me a bit to realize that I was initially trying to put a bolt into a hole with no thread. Once the pressure plate was back on, I could remove the center nut. It's pretty tight. The manual says 64 Newton meters, and the gears have to be prevented from spinning for sure. Notice the block of wood wedged in at the bottom right there. With the nut out of the way, I tried to pull the whole thing out, but there's a sort of oil cradle that's in the way. That one is held in place by 2 bolts at the bottom there, and it needs to be removed. I didn't want to bore anyone with the removal of the lifter plate again. You saw me do that previously. But of course, to get to this point, you need to have removed it already. Also notice the washer in the middle and remember where it comes from. You will end up with 3 washers, 2 from the clutch assembly and 1 from the oil spinner, and they are all different in thickness. Now, the point here is to remove the friction discs and plates inside there in order to replace them. There are a couple of ways to do that. I chose to take out this inner part. Notice 2 of the washers I mentioned earlier. And then the stack of discs and plates can be extracted. They are simply one on top of the other. Remember, the stack starts and ends with a friction disc, the brown ones with tiny rectangles on them. Another way to do this is to pull the whole assembly out, which may allow you more flexibility in putting things back together. As far as I'm concerned, and compared to the state of my CRF's discs, I would call these mint condition, but I will replace everything anyway, even the steel plates. The reverse process is pretty straightforward. Unlike other bikes, all discs are the same, all plates are the same size and shape. So as long as you remember to put a brown disc in first, you should be good. I don't let these soak in oil as people sometimes recommend, but I do dip each of them in the old oil before putting them back in. It's what seems to work for me. Feel free to leave them soaking in fresh oil overnight if that gives you peace of mind. And don't forget that center washer. There's quite a bit of talk in other videos I watched about properly aligning the teeth of this inner part to the teeth of the outer part, and for good reason. I failed to mark the position of these parts when I took them out. I strongly suggest you do that with a marker. So in my case, I had to fumble my way around until I could get all the teeth of the discs and plates aligned, and also, very importantly, the lip of this tapered edge to sit just deep enough. Look at how they align. See? That's it. That's the proper depth right there. My understanding is that if you fail to do this correctly, your clutch won't engage. And don't forget the proper washer and special nut number 2. Right, and a very quick fast forward through the process of putting back the pressure plate. In my case, I had to keep nudging the springs back in place a couple of times to put them in the right position. I then torqued the special nut to 64 Newton meters. The replacement bearing went in very easily. Not sure this matters, but I put it in with the writing facing outwards. I then slid the oil spinner back on, added the thick washer and special nut number 1, which had a paint marker on it. Not sure if it goes in both ways. I mentioned a bit earlier how I would not recommend using a piece of wood or a screwdriver to stop the gears from turning. When the time came to torque the nut, I ran into some issues. Maybe that's why Honda sells another special tool for this, pictured above. Now, I do think that buying a tool specifically for this is overkill, but maybe learn from my mistakes and find the proper thing to wedge in there. Aluminum or copper would be ideal. A thick coin would also work. What I tried to use here was a small length of copper pipe with one end flattened, but that didn't work as intended. The gears started biting into the copper. Check it out. I'm glad I didn't apply even more pressure. The new and improved tool features a double folded end that proved to be the right size. I wonder if I had the bike in gear at the time, and if not, would those wheels have been locked if it was in gear? I guess it's one of those things we may never find out. I put a sort of bonding agent on the 3 oil spinner bolts because it was there before I removed them. I'm not sure of the brand or bonding strength, but I keep hearing that red is stronger than blue, so I'm satisfied with this one. I also replaced the plasticky triangle looking gasket. Then I tightened up the bolts just a tiny bit by hand. With the glue in place, I don't think more is needed. Putting a new gasket in is super easy. There are a couple of dowels there that help you align it. I didn't oil this one up as I did on my CRF. It will be interesting to see what they both look like when I take them apart again. Curious to see if there are any differences. And then the cover and the 9 bolts. Don't forget to include the 3 cable brackets also, and to connect the clutch cable.
Right, so I went and got myself a box of ice cream to celebrate this success. And you also know that I reuse ice cream containers. So, yeah, everything went back in place quite easily. And I'm taking her for a spin. Everything feels just fine.